Sarah Montgomery pressed her trembling fingers against the bruised blooming purple across her cheekbone. Through the cracked mirror above the washbasin, she studied the woman staring back at her with hollow eyes. 23 years old, and she looked ancient. The reflection showed more than physical damage. It revealed a spirit worn thin as parchment, ready to tear completely. "You clumsy fool." Thomas's voice still echoed in her mind from that morning. The coffee had been too cold. That was her crime. The punishment had come swiftly, as it always did. His fist connected with practiced precision, placed where her high collar would hide the evidence. He had learned to be careful after that one time when her sister had noticed. After that incident, Thomas made sure his lessons left marks only in hidden places. The year was 1872, and Sarah lived in a respectable house on a respectable street in St. Louis. Her husband worked at his father's banking firm. They attended church every Sunday. The neighbors smiled and tipped their hats. Everything looked perfect from the outside, which made the rot within even more suffocating. She had married Thomas 3 years ago, believing his charm and status would bring her security. Instead, she had traded her freedom for a cage with gilded bars. Sarah splashed cold water on her face and straightened her spine. Today was marketing day. She would walk to the mercantile, purchase what the household needed, and return home before Thomas finished his business downtown. The routine kept her sane, these small moments of stepping beyond the walls that imprisoned her. The streets bustled with activity as she made her way through the city. Wagons creaked past carrying goods. Children darted between adults. A newspaper boy shouted headlines about Indian troubles out west. Sarah paid him no mind. The world beyond her suffering felt distant, unreal. She moved through the crowds like a ghost, there but not truly present. At the mercantile, she gathered flour, sugar, and lamp oil. The shopkeeper, Mr. Chen, always treated her with gentle kindness. He never asked about the bruises or the way she flinched when someone moved too quickly near her. Perhaps he knew. Perhaps everyone knew and simply chose to look away. That was how these things worked in polite society. As she turned to leave, 3 men burst through the door, their faces painted for war, their eyes wild with desperation. Lakota warriors. Sarah's heart seized. The shop erupted in chaos. People screamed and scrambled for the exits. Mr. Chen reached for something beneath his counter. Everything happened in heartbeats. One warrior grabbed Sarah's arm, spinning her around. She looked into his face and saw not savagery but stark fear. He was young, perhaps 19, with a deep wound bleeding through the leather across his chest. Behind him, his companions were equally battered. These were not raiders. These were survivors. "Please," the young warrior said in broken English. "Help. Brother's dying." Before Sarah could respond, Thomas appeared in the doorway. His face twisted with rage at seeing his wife in the grasp of a native man. "Release her, you savage." He pulled a pistol from his coat. The moment stretched impossibly long. Sarah saw the calculation in Thomas's eyes. He would shoot, and he would not care if she stood in the way. To him, she was already less than human, already something he could discard. The realization hit her with crystal clarity. If she stayed, she would die by his hand eventually. It was simply a matter of time. The warriors began backing toward the rear door, pulling her with them. Thomas raised his weapon. Sarah made her choice. She stopped resisting. She let them take her. As bullets shattered the air behind them, she ran with the Lakota into an unknown future, leaving behind the certain death of her civilized life. Whatever waited ahead could not possibly be worse than what she was leaving behind. The Lakota warriors pulled Sarah through back alleys and across open prairie until the city became a distant smudge on the horizon. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed in protest. But fear pushed her forward, fear of Thomas's bullets finding their mark, fear of being dragged back to that house of horrors. The warriors moved with desperate speed, clearly running from something more than just the chaos at the mercantile. When they finally stopped in a shallow ravine, Sarah collapsed against a boulder, gasping. The young warrior who had grabbed her in the shop knelt nearby, pressing his hand against the wound on his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers. His 2 companions were in worse condition. One had a bullet lodged in his shoulder. The other clutched his side where a deep gash revealed he had been slashed by a blade. "You are healer?" the young warrior asked, his dark eyes fixed on Sarah with desperate hope. Sarah shook her head. "I'm just a housewife. I don't know medicine." His face fell, but then he gestured to his injured friends. "Try. Please. They die without help." Something stirred inside Sarah, something that had been dormant for years. Purpose. She had spent so long being Thomas's victim that she had forgotten she possessed hands that could do more than cower. She had watched her mother tend to sick neighbors. She had helped birth her sister's children. The knowledge was there, buried beneath layers of learned helplessness. She examined the warrior's injuries with shaking hands. The bullet in the shoulder would need to come out. The chest wound required cleaning and binding. The gash needed stitches. She had none of the proper supplies, but she had determination. Using the young warrior's knife, she cut strips from her petticoat. She used whiskey from a flask one warrior carried to clean the wounds. Her hands grew steadier with each passing moment. The warrior with the bullet gritted his teeth as Sarah probed the wound. She found the metal and extracted it with the tip of the knife. He never cried out, though sweat poured down his face. His stoicism amazed her. Thomas would have screamed and blamed her for his pain. These men simply endured. As she worked, the young warrior told their story. His name was Red Hawk. The other two were his cousins, Standing Bear and Swift Arrow. They had been part of a hunting party attacked by soldiers 3 days ago. Most of their group had been killed. They had fled east, hoping to find medicine or help, instead finding only more violence and hatred in the white settlements they passed through. "Why did you take me?" Sarah asked as she bound Red Hawk's chest with clean strips of cloth. "You had kind eyes," he said simply. "In the shop, when I grabbed you, you did not scream. You looked at me like I was human. Not many of your people do that." He paused, studying her face. "And I saw the mark on your face. Someone hurt you. I thought maybe you would understand what it means to run from danger." Sarah's throat tightened. This stranger, this man her people called savage, had seen her in a way Thomas never had. He had recognized her humanity in a glance, had offered her escape without knowing he was doing so. They rested through the evening and into the night. Sarah learned that Red Hawk spoke English because missionaries had taught him as a child. He had wanted to build bridges between their peoples. Instead, he had watched those bridges burn as violence escalated on both sides. The bitterness in his voice mirrored something in her own heart. They had both believed in goodness and been taught harsh lessons about reality. By dawn, the wounded men could travel again. Red Hawk explained they were heading north to rejoin their tribe. Sarah could go back to the city if she chose. He would not force her to continue with them. The offer hung in the air between them. Sarah thought of Thomas. She thought of the endless days of walking on eggshells, of measuring every word, of wearing long sleeves in summer to hide finger-shaped bruises. She thought of the hollow woman in the mirror who had lost all hope. Then she thought of the feeling in her chest when she had helped these warriors, the sudden memory of what it felt like to matter, to have purpose beyond merely surviving until the next beating. "I'll come with you," she said. "There's nothing for me back there." Red Hawk nodded slowly, understanding more than she had spoken. "The journey will be hard. My people may not welcome you. White settlers have brought much pain to our nation." "I understand," Sarah replied. "But I'd rather face uncertain hardship than certain death." So they traveled north together, four broken people bound by circumstance. Sarah learned to move quietly through the tall grass, to read the landscape for signs of danger, to sleep light and wake fast. She learned Lakota words. She learned the names of plants that could heal or feed. Each day carried her further from the woman she had been and closer to someone she could not yet imagine becoming. After 10 days of traveling, they reached the Lakota camp nestled in a valley where the river bent like a silver snake. Teepees dotted the landscape, their painted hides telling stories Sarah could not yet read. Children played near the water. Women worked on stretched hides. The smoke of cooking fires drifted upward into a sky so vast it made Sarah feel impossibly small. The moment they entered the camp, silence fell like a stone. Every eye turned toward them. Sarah felt the weight of those stares, felt the suspicion and anger radiating from the gathered people. She was white. She was the enemy. It did not matter that she came injured and exhausted. It did not matter that Red Hawk spoke on her behalf. She represented everything that had brought pain to these people. An older woman spat at Sarah's feet. Others shouted words she did not understand, but their meaning was clear. Several men reached for weapons. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She had escaped one death only to walk straight into another. Then a figure emerged from the largest teepee. He moved with authority, his presence commanding instant respect. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore his hair in 2 long braids decorated with eagle feathers. His face bore the weathered lines of someone who had seen perhaps 40 winters, and his eyes held a sharpness that missed nothing. This was clearly a man of importance. Red Hawk stepped forward and spoke rapidly in Lakota, explaining their story. The chief listened without interruption, his gaze occasionally flicking to Sarah. She met his eyes despite her fear, refusing to look away. She had spent 3 years staring at the floor in submission. She would not start that pattern again. When Red Hawk finished speaking, the chief studied Sarah for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the assembled tribe. Red Hawk translated. Chief Broken Arrow says you saved the lives of our warriors. For this, you will be given sanctuary. But you must prove your worth to remain among us. You will work, you will learn our ways, and you will be watched. If you bring danger to this tribe, you will be cast out. It was not a warm welcome, but it was mercy. Sarah nodded her acceptance. The following weeks tested every fiber of her being. She was given a space in the teepee of an elderly widow named Whispering Wind, who spoke no English and showed Sarah no kindness. Sarah woke before dawn to help with morning tasks. She hauled water from the river until her shoulders ached. She scraped hides until her fingers bled. She ground corn and gathered firewood and mended torn clothing. The work was endless and grueling. The other women tolerated her presence but did not welcome it. They spoke around her, never to her. When she made mistakes, which she did constantly, they sighed with exasperation or laughed at her incompetence. Sarah understood their resentment. She was an outsider, a representative of the people who had stolen their lands and slaughtered their families. But Sarah had survived Thomas's cruelty through stubbornness and silent endurance. She applied those same skills now. She watched carefully, learned quickly, and never complained. Slowly, imperceptibly, attitudes began to shift. When she successfully tanned her first hide, one of the younger women offered a brief nod of approval. When she helped deliver a baby during a difficult birth, drawing on the skills she had learned helping her sister, the new mother thanked her with genuine warmth. Chief Broken Arrow watched her progress from a distance. Sarah felt his eyes on her often, studying, evaluating. He never spoke to her directly, but she sensed his presence like a shadow at the edge of her vision. There was something in his gaze that unsettled her, not with fear but with an intensity she could not name. One evening, as Sarah carried water back to camp, she heard shouting. She arrived to find a commotion near the chief's teepee. A raiding party had returned with news of soldiers approaching from the south. The tribe would need to move within days. The announcement brought fear and exhaustion to every face. That night, Sarah lay awake in Whispering Wind's teepee, listening to the sounds of the camp. She heard mothers soothing frightened children. She heard men making plans for the coming journey. She heard the quiet weeping of those who were too tired to run anymore. These people carried burdens Sarah was only beginning to understand. They were not the savages she had been taught to fear. They were families trying to survive in a world that wanted them erased. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in Sarah's heart. She had come to this tribe seeking escape from her own nightmare. She had viewed her presence here as temporary, a stopping point before figuring out her next move. But listening to the fear in the darkness, she realized she had found something unexpected. She had found people who understood what it meant to be hunted, to be seen as less than human, to fight for dignity in the face of endless cruelty. She had found a place where her suffering made sense to others, where her scars were understood without explanation. She had found a home worth fighting for. The tribe moved northwest, following game trails through territories that grew increasingly unfamiliar to Sarah. She helped take down teepees, pack supplies, and herd horses. The work left her exhausted, but she took pride in keeping pace with the others. She was no longer dead weight. She contributed. She mattered. Chief Broken Arrow rode at the head of the column, his attention constantly scanning the horizon for threats. Sarah found herself watching him when she thought no one noticed. There was a sadness in him, a weight he carried that reminded her of the heaviness she had felt staring into her own mirror in St. Louis. She wondered what losses had carved those lines into his face. On the third day of travel, a storm descended without warning. Rain lashed sideways, driven by winds that threatened to tear the world apart. The tribe made camp in a protected hollow, working frantically to secure the teepees against the weather. Sarah helped Whispering Wind anchor their shelter, her clothes soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. A cry went up from the edge of camp. A child had wandered off before the storm hit. Her mother stood at the tree line, screaming her daughter's name into the howling wind. Several warriors prepared to search, but the conditions were deadly. Going out there meant risking everything. Sarah did not think. She simply moved. She grabbed a rope and tied one end around her waist, handing the other end to Red Hawk. Before anyone could stop her, she plunged into the storm. The forest became a maze of shadows and confusion. Rain blinded her. Wind tore at her clothes. She called out for the child in her halting Lakota, hoping her voice would carry. Then she heard it. A small cry, nearly lost in the storm's roar. Sarah followed the sound to a fallen tree where a little girl huddled beneath the branches, terrified and shivering. Sarah scooped her up, held her close, and followed the rope back to camp. When she emerged from the darkness with the child in her arms, the mother rushed forward with a sob of relief. The entire tribe had gathered, watching. Sarah handed over the girl, her legs shaking with exhaustion and the after-effects of fear. She had not thought about danger. She had simply seen a child in need and responded. Chief Broken Arrow stood at the front of the crowd, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped forward and spoke in clear, careful English. "You risked your life for one of our children. This is not the action of an enemy. This is the action of family." The words hung in the air, their weight immense. Around them, the tribe murmured in agreement. The barrier that had separated Sarah from full acceptance cracked open. That night, women who had never spoken to her brought her dry clothes and hot food. Children who had avoided her smiled shyly and touched her hand. She had proven herself in a way that transcended language and culture. As the storm cleared and stars emerged, Chief Broken Arrow approached Sarah as she sat near the fire. He lowered himself to sit beside her, a gesture of equality that surprised her. For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching flames dance. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he said quietly, his English accented but precise. "Soldiers raided our winter camp. She was killed trying to protect our daughter. Our daughter died too. She was 5 years old." His voice remained steady, but Sarah heard the ocean of grief beneath the calm surface. "Since that day, I have carried anger in my heart. Anger at all white people. You came to our camp, and I saw only the color of your skin. I did not see you." Sarah understood the courage it took for him to share this. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'm sorry for everything my people have done to yours." "You are not responsible for the actions of others," Broken Arrow replied. "I am learning this." He turned to look at her fully. "Red Hawk told me why you left your city. He told me about the man who hurt you. You know what it means to be seen as less than human. You know what it means to survive cruelty. In this, we are the same." Sarah met his eyes and found understanding there, recognition of shared pain. "In my world, I was nothing," she said. "I was property. I had no voice, no choices, no hope. Here, even when your people hated me, even when they had every reason to reject me, I felt more human than I did in all my years of so-called civilization." "Your people call us savages," Broken Arrow said, "but they do not see that we value what they have forgotten. We honor our elders. We cherish our children. We believe a person's worth comes from their character and actions, not their birth or wealth. A woman in our tribe can own property, can divorce an abusive husband, can speak in council if she has wisdom to share. What your people call savage, we call civilized." The truth of his words struck Sarah deeply. She had been taught that native peoples were primitive, lacking culture and morality. But living among the Lakota had shown her a society built on principles of respect, community, and honor. These were not lessons she had learned in the churches and parlors of St. Louis, where brutality hid behind pretty manners and polite smiles. "I do not belong in the white world anymore," Sarah said. "I don't think I ever truly did." Broken Arrow nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you belong here. With us. With people who see your strength and value it. With people who understand that survival requires courage, and courage deserves respect." From that night forward, everything changed. Months passed, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of tribal life. Sarah's hands grew calloused but capable. Her skin darkened from constant sun. She wore buckskin dresses decorated with quill work taught to her by the women who had become her friends. She spoke Lakota fluently now, thinking in the language more often than English. The transformation was complete. She had stopped being Sarah Montgomery, beaten wife from St. Louis. She had become something new, someone stronger. Her relationship with Chief Broken Arrow deepened naturally, like a river finding its course. They talked long into the night about everything and nothing. He taught her about his people's history, their beliefs, their connection to the land. She shared stories of her childhood before Thomas, the girl she had been before fear had stolen her voice. They recognized each other in ways that went beyond words. Both had been broken. Both had survived. Both had learned that strength often grows from the deepest wounds. When Broken Arrow asked her to become his wife, Sarah felt no hesitation. This was not like her first marriage, born from social pressure and false promises. This was a choice made with full knowledge and complete freedom. She could refuse without consequences. She could leave if she wished. That freedom made her acceptance meaningful. The wedding ceremony differed entirely from the sterile church service that had bound her to Thomas. The entire tribe gathered to witness and celebrate. Elders offered prayers and blessings. Women sang traditional songs. Sarah wore a white doeskin dress decorated with hundreds of tiny shells that caught the light like stars. Broken Arrow presented her with horses, a sign of respect and commitment. In return, she gave him a quiver she had spent weeks crafting, each arrow perfectly balanced and true. When they spoke their vows before the assembled people, Sarah promised to stand beside him as an equal partner, to share his burdens, to help lead their people through whatever trials came. Broken Arrow promised to honor her voice, to protect her safety, to see her always as the strong woman she had become. These were not empty words spoken by rote. These were sacred commitments between two souls who had earned each other's trust through shared struggle. The tribe accepted her fully now, not as a white woman living among them, but as one of their own. They called her Morning Star, a name earned through her actions and character. She had proven herself worthy through countless small acts of courage and dedication. She sat in women's councils, her opinions valued. She helped settle disputes with wisdom learned from hard experience. Young girls sought her advice. Mothers trusted her with their children. But the world beyond their camp remained hostile. Soldiers continued to hunt them. The government pushed westward, claiming land and breaking treaties. The tribe moved frequently, always searching for safety that proved increasingly elusive. Sarah used her knowledge of white society to help. She could read the papers soldiers carried. She understood their tactics. She warned when danger approached. Her insight saved lives. One autumn morning, a cavalry unit surrounded their camp. The commander demanded they surrender and relocate to a reservation. Broken Arrow prepared to negotiate, knowing their position was weak. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But Sarah stepped forward and asked to speak with the commander alone. The officer was shocked to find a white woman among the Lakota, more shocked still when she spoke with educated clarity about legal treaties and government promises. She used every rhetorical skill she had learned in her old life, arguing their case with logic and passion. She shamed the commander by pointing out the contradiction between his Christian values and his willingness to displace peaceful families. She reminded him that history would judge his actions. Her words created enough doubt that the commander agreed to report back to his superiors rather than attacking immediately. It bought the tribe time to move to safer territory. When Sarah returned to camp, the people cheered. Broken Arrow looked at her with a mixture of pride and love that made her heart soar. That night, sitting beside him in their teepee, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a beaten woman with no hope, she had become a chief's wife, a valued member of a community, a person whose voice mattered. She had escaped one form of captivity and found genuine freedom in a place her old world considered primitive and savage. "Do you ever regret leaving your old life?" Broken Arrow asked, sensing her contemplative mood. Sarah shook her head. "I regret the years I wasted believing I deserved nothing better. But I don't regret finding my way here. You and this tribe saved me in ways that have nothing to do with physical rescue. You showed me what it means to be valued for who I am rather than what I represent. You gave me back my humanity." "You did that yourself," Broken Arrow replied, taking her hand. "We only recognized what was already there. Your strength. Your courage. Your compassionate heart. These things were always part of you. You simply needed a place where they could flourish instead of being crushed." Sarah leaned against him, feeling utterly at peace. Outside, she heard the sounds of the camp settling for the night. Children's laughter. Elders telling stories. The low murmur of conversation. These were her people now. This was her home. She had traveled from beaten bride to honored queen, not through royal bloodlines or inherited privilege, but through the most difficult journey of all, the journey from victim to survivor, from broken to whole, from invisible to seen. She had found her place in the world. She had found her voice. She had found herself. And in doing so, she had discovered that true nobility had nothing to do with society's definitions of civilization. True nobility came from character, courage, and the choice to keep your humanity intact even when the world tried to strip it away. Sarah Montgomery was gone forever. Morning Star, wife of Chief Broken Arrow, honored woman of the Lakota people, had taken her place. And Morning Star was finally, beautifully free.